Hey there, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 42 years old from Phoenix, Arizona, and tonight I want to share something with you that completely transformed how I understand life, death, and what lies beyond. This isn't easy for me to talk about even now, 3 years later, but I feel compelled to share it, maybe because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this story, someone who's questioning everything, just like I was. It happened on a scorching July afternoon in 2021. The kind of day where the asphalt shimmers like water and the air burns your lungs. I was rushing home from my daughter's soccer practice, already running late for dinner with my husband. The intersection ahead was busy, cars weaving through the heat waves, everyone eager to escape the desert sun. I remember checking my phone for a text, just for a split second, just long enough to miss the red light. The truck hit my driver's side door going 45 miles per hour. The impact was so violent, it spun my car 3 times before slamming it into a concrete barrier. In that fraction of a second before collision, time seemed to crystallize. I saw my daughter's face in the rearview mirror from earlier, heard her laugh echoing in my mind. I thought about my husband waiting at home, probably wondering where I was. And then came the crushing sound of metal against metal, glass exploding like fireworks, and my world went completely dark. When the first responders arrived, I was already gone. My body was trapped in the twisted wreckage, blood pooling beneath the dashboard, my pulse barely detectable. They worked frantically to cut me free, their voices sharp with urgency. One paramedic kept saying, "Stay with us, Sarah, stay with us." But I wasn't there anymore. I was floating above the scene, watching it all unfold like a movie I wasn't starring in. The strangest part wasn't the absence of pain, it was the clarity. My thoughts were crystal clear, sharper than they'd ever been in life. I could see every detail below me with impossible precision. The way sweat beaded on the paramedic's forehead as he worked to stabilize my neck. The small crowd of strangers who had stopped to help, their faces etched with concern for someone they'd never met. The broken glass catching the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. None of it felt real, yet it was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I remember thinking, is this really happening? But even as I questioned it, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace washing over me. It was as if invisible arms had wrapped around my soul, whispering, "You're safe now. Everything is exactly as it should be." The chaos below me seemed so distant, so temporary. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely, utterly at peace. Then I noticed something shifting around me. The bright Arizona sky began to fade, replaced by what I can only describe as a gentle darkness. Not the frightening kind of darkness you experience in a nightmare, but more like being held in the softest velvet. It was familiar somehow, as if I had been there before, perhaps long before I was born. I felt myself being drawn forward, though I had no body to move with. It was more like floating on a current of pure love. Ahead of me, a tunnel began to form. But this wasn't like the tunnels you see in movies. It wasn't made of rock or metal or light. It was woven from something I had no words for. Pure consciousness, maybe, or crystallized peace. As I moved toward it, I felt layers of earthly worry peeling away from me like old skin. The anxiety about my daughter's future, the stress about mortgage payments, the regret over harsh words spoken in anger, all of it simply dissolved. The tunnel seemed to stretch infinitely, yet distance had no meaning here. I could see the beginning and the end simultaneously, as if my perception had expanded beyond the limitations of human sight. And at the far end, there was a glow. Not bright in the way sunlight is bright, but warm, inviting, alive. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt familiar, like a heartbeat I had known since before time began. As I approached that glow, I felt love, unlike anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't the love between people, though that's beautiful. This was the love that creates universes, the love that holds every atom together, the love that whispers life into being. It was so vast, so complete, that I wondered how I had ever lived without knowing it existed. And yet somehow I realized I had always known it. I had just forgotten. The deeper I moved into the tunnel, the stronger that love became. It wasn't pushing against me or pulling me forward. It was simply there, surrounding me, filling every space in my being I didn't even know was empty. And with each step closer to the light, I felt memories awakening. Not memories from my life, but memories from before my life. As if I was remembering who I really was, underneath all the roles I had played. Wife, mother, teacher, daughter, those were just costumes I had worn. This was my true self, the part of me that was eternal. The glow ahead began to take shape, though shape isn't the right word. It was more like consciousness forming into something my mind could barely comprehend. Radiance poured from it in waves, each wave carrying pure love, pure acceptance, pure understanding. I realized I was approaching the source of everything, the place where all souls come from and return to. Home. And then, suddenly, I was there. Standing in the presence of light so beautiful it made every sunset I'd ever seen look pale by comparison. But this light didn't hurt my eyes. Instead, it seemed to shine through me, illuminating parts of myself I had never seen before. I felt transparent, but not vulnerable, exposed, but completely safe. Every secret shame, every hidden fear, every dark thought I'd ever harbored was visible here. And yet I felt no judgment, only infinite compassion. The light spoke to me, though speaking isn't the right word either. It was more like truth being placed directly into my understanding. Welcome home, beloved child. Those words, or that knowing, washed over me like warm rain after a drought. I had been beloved all along. Through every mistake, every failure, every moment I had felt unworthy or alone, I had been beloved the entire time. Around me, figures began to emerge from the radiance. They weren't people exactly, but souls, beings of pure love and light. Some felt familiar, like family I had known before birth. Others felt like guides who had been walking beside me invisibly throughout my entire life. They didn't speak with words, but their presence communicated volumes. We've been waiting for you. We've been watching over you. You are never alone. One presence drew closer, and instantly I knew. This was my grandmother, Rose, who had passed when I was 7. But she wasn't the frail, sick woman I remembered from her final days. She was radiant, whole, more herself than she had ever been in life. Without words, she showed me how she had been with me through every important moment. My wedding day, when I felt her love in the gentle breeze that lifted my veil. The night my daughter was born, when an inexplicable peace had filled the delivery room. She had been there, loving me, guiding me, celebrating with me. But beyond all these beautiful beings was a presence so magnificent I can barely find words to describe it. If love itself could take form, this would be it. If compassion could walk among us, this would be how it looked. The presence radiated such perfect love that everything else seemed to bow in reverence. I knew, without needing to be told, that I was in the presence of the divine. Some might call it God, others might use different names, but labels felt too small for what I experienced. This was the source from which all love flows. And then began what I can only call a life review, though it was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a judgment or a test. It was more like finally seeing a masterpiece painting after only knowing the individual brushstrokes. Every moment of my 42 years played out before me, but not in sequence. Instead, it was as if my entire life existed all at once, like a vast tapestry spread before me. I saw myself at 5 years old, sharing my sandwich with a lonely classmate. I felt not only my own innocent generosity, but the warmth that simple act had brought to that child's heart. The ripple effect stretched far beyond that moment. That act of kindness had taught her that people could be good, planting a seed that would grow into her own compassion years later. Then I saw myself at 16, saying cruel words to my younger brother during an argument. I felt his pain as if it were my own, the way those words had cut deep into his confidence, creating wounds that took years to heal. But even there, in that moment of failure, I felt no condemnation from the presence beside me, only understanding, and an invitation to see how that pain had eventually taught my brother resilience, how it had made him more sensitive to others' struggles. Every interaction, every choice, every word spoken in love or anger was connected to an infinite web of consequences. I saw how a patient explanation to a struggling student had sparked her love of learning, leading her to become a teacher herself. I witnessed how my impatience with a grocery store clerk had darkened his already difficult day, causing him to go home and snap at his children. The interconnectedness was overwhelming, beautiful, and humbling all at once. As the life review continued, I began to understand something profound. Every person I had encountered was not just another character in my story. They were fellow souls on their own sacred journey, each carrying their own burdens, their own light, their own connection to this infinite source of love. When I had judged someone harshly, I was judging a part of myself. When I had shown compassion, I was recognizing the divine spark that lives in all of us. The presence beside me radiated such understanding, such complete knowledge of who I was, that I felt naked in the most beautiful way. There was no hiding here, no pretending, no masks to wear. And in that transparency, I discovered something miraculous. I was loved not despite my flaws, but with them. Every mistake I had made, every time I had fallen short of my own ideals, it was all held in this boundless compassion. Why? I asked without words. Why do you love me so completely when I've failed so many times? And the answer came not as words, but as pure knowing flowing into my consciousness. Because failure is part of learning, because struggle is part of growth, because you are my child, and my love is not earned. It simply is. In that moment, I understood what unconditional really meant. It wasn't love that ignored my faults. It was love that saw them clearly and embraced me anyway. Love that knew every shadow in my heart and chose to focus on the light. Love that had never once turned away from me, even when I had turned away from it. The presence began to show me things about existence I had never imagined. How every soul chooses its path before birth, not randomly, but with purpose. How every challenge we face is an opportunity to remember our true nature, which is love. How every person we meet is both teacher and student, giving us chances to practice compassion or learn forgiveness. I saw my own soul's journey, not just this lifetime, but the eternal path I was on. I understood that my difficult childhood, the loss of my father when I was 12, the struggles in my marriage, even this accident, they weren't punishments or random tragedies. They were classrooms. Each experience was designed to help me grow, to chip away at the illusions that kept me from remembering who I really was. But why is it so hard? I wondered. Why can't we just remember while we're alive? The answer filled my understanding gently. Because the forgetting is part of the learning. If you remembered everything, every choice would be easy. But growth comes from choosing love even when it's difficult, even when you can't see the bigger picture. That's where courage lives. That's where faith becomes real. I was shown glimpses of the magnificent plan that connects all souls, all experiences, all of creation. It was like seeing the universe as a grand symphony where every note, even the discordant ones, contributed to something breathtakingly beautiful. My life, with all its struggles and joys, was just one melody in this cosmic composition. But it mattered. Every note mattered. As I absorbed these truths, I felt a shift beginning. The light around me started to pulse differently, and I sensed that my time here was coming to an end. No, I pleaded silently. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here where everything makes sense, where love is all there is. But the presence radiated gentle firmness. Your work is not finished. You have more love to give, more hearts to touch, more lessons to learn and teach. I felt myself being shown flashes of my future. My daughter graduating college, my husband's proud smile, moments of connection with students who needed encouragement, conversations with strangers who would need to hear about this love that never dies. I saw how my return would create ripples of hope in ways I couldn't imagine. But I'll forget, I protested. I'll go back to worrying about bills and schedules and all the things that don't matter. The presence wrapped me in such tender understanding. You won't forget completely. I will leave traces in your heart, reminders in quiet moments. And when you share this love with others, you'll remember more. Love shared is love multiplied. Reluctantly, I began to accept that my journey back to Earth was not optional. It was part of a larger plan, a plan woven with such intricate care that even my resistance was held in love. The presence began to prepare me for return, and I felt teachings being planted deep in my soul, like seeds that would bloom later when I needed them. Remember, the voice said, flooding my being with knowing, prayer is not just words spoken in desperation or gratitude. Prayer is living with awareness that you are never separate from love. Every kind act is a prayer. Every moment of patience with yourself or others is a prayer. Every choice to see light instead of darkness is a prayer. I felt this truth settling into my bones, or what would become my bones again. Prayer wasn't something I did. It was something I was. A constant conversation with the divine that happened through how I treated the cashier at the grocery store, how I responded when my teenager tested my patience, how I chose to see the homeless man on the corner not as a nuisance, but as a child of God. And remember, the presence continued, suffering is not punishment. It is not evidence that you are unloved or forgotten. Suffering is the soul's gymnasium, where spiritual muscles grow strong. When you embrace your struggles with courage, instead of bitterness, they become stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. They become opportunities to discover just how much strength and grace you actually carry. I saw visions of people throughout history who had transformed their pain into power, not by avoiding it or numbing it, but by walking through it with faith. Their suffering had become sources of wisdom, compassion, and healing for countless others. I understood that my own struggles, past and future, could serve the same purpose if I chose to meet them with an open heart. The presence showed me one more thing that took my breath away, if I had breath to take. I saw the truth about every person I had ever judged, dismissed, or written off. Each one was here in this same light, equally beloved, equally precious. The homeless veteran struggling with addiction was surrounded by the same infinite love that held me. The politician whose views I despised was someone's cherished child in the eyes of the divine. The difficult co-worker who made my days harder was fighting battles I knew nothing about, carrying wounds that called for healing, not judgment. This is why you must return, the presence explained with such gentle authority, to remember that everyone you meet is walking their own sacred path. Some may seem lost, some may act in ways that hurt others, but underneath every harsh exterior is a soul crying out for the same love that holds you now. Your job is not to judge their journey. Your job is to be a reminder of this love, to see the light in them even when they cannot see it themselves. I felt the weight of this mission settling over me, not as a burden, but as a profound honor. I was being trusted with something sacred. The memory of this perfect love, this absolute acceptance, this truth about our interconnectedness. I was being asked to carry it back into a world that had forgotten these truths, to live in such a way that others might remember too. But even as I accepted this calling, part of me rebelled. How could I possibly return to the world of bills and traffic and petty arguments when I had tasted eternity? How could I care about deadlines and social media and all the trivial things that had consumed so much of my energy? The presence seemed to smile, though it had no face to smile with. You will care about different things now. You will see the sacred in the ordinary. You will find me in the laughter of your daughter, in the tears of a friend, in the sunrise that greets you each morning. I'm not only here in this light, I'm everywhere, waiting to be recognized. As these final teachings settled into my soul, I felt the pull beginning. It started as a gentle tug, like being called by someone you love from another room. But gradually, it became stronger, more insistent. I was being drawn back toward the tunnel, back toward the world I had left behind. Every part of me wanted to resist, to cling to this place of perfect understanding. But I knew the choice was no longer mine to make. The journey back through the tunnel felt different this time. Where before I had moved toward light with anticipation, now I traveled toward darkness with reluctance. But even in my resistance, I felt surrounded by love. The beings who had welcomed me into the light were now accompanying me back, their presence a comfort as I faced the return to physical existence. As I neared the end of the tunnel, I could see my broken body lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and medical staff. It looked so small, so fragile, so damaged. Tubes snaked from my mouth and arms, monitors beeped frantically, and doctors worked with desperate intensity. For a moment I hesitated. Did I really want to go back into that shell? Could that damaged form even sustain life? But then I saw him, my husband, Mark, standing in the corner of the room with tears streaming down his face. His lips were moving in silent prayer, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. And behind him, barely visible through the window, I could see my sister holding my daughter, both of them crying, both of them hoping against hope that I would somehow pull through. In that instant, I understood why I had to return. It wasn't just about my own unfinished business. It was about the love that connected me to these precious souls, the promises I had made, the lives that were intertwined with mine. Love had brought me to that divine place, and love was calling me back. The re-entry was violent and shocking. One moment I was floating in perfect peace. The next, I was slammed back into a body screaming with pain. Every nerve seemed to be on fire, every breath a monumental effort. The fluorescent hospital lights were harsh and cold compared to the warm radiance I had just left. The sounds of machines and hurried voices felt like chaos after the serene silence I had experienced. But underneath the physical agony, something else was stirring. The love I had encountered in that place beyond the veil hadn't stayed behind. It had come back with me, planted like a seed in my heart. Even as my body struggled to remember how to breathe, my soul carried the memory of that perfect acceptance, that boundless compassion. The first words I managed to whisper were, I saw God. The nurse leaning over me paused, her eyes widening. Later, she would tell me that something in my voice made her believe me instantly. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in my tone, or maybe it was something she saw in my eyes. But in that moment, she simply nodded and squeezed my hand. Recovery was long and painful. My body had been broken in ways that required months of physical therapy and multiple surgeries. But my spirit had been healed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Every day in the hospital, I practiced what I had learned in that place of light. When the pain was overwhelming, I remembered that suffering could be met with courage. When nurses were short-tempered or visitors said thoughtless things, I practiced seeing the divine spark in them, recognizing their own struggles and pain. The most profound change came in how I saw ordinary moments. The custodian who cleaned my room each morning wasn't just doing a job. He was showing love through service, creating a clean, healing space for someone he barely knew. The physical therapist who pushed me through painful exercises wasn't just following protocol. She was helping me reclaim my body, my mobility, my independence. Every interaction became an opportunity to recognize love in action. When I finally went home, my family expected me to be grateful but broken. Instead, they found someone transformed. I was grateful, yes, but not broken. I was more whole than I had ever been. The things that used to stress me seemed trivial now. Traffic jams became opportunities for prayer. Difficult conversations became chances to practice patience. Even conflict felt different when I remembered that everyone involved was a beloved child of the same divine source. My daughter Emma was the first to notice the change. "Mom," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "you're different now. You're peaceful." Out of the mouths of babes. She was right. The anxiety that had driven so much of my life before the accident had been replaced by a deep, abiding trust. Not that life would be easy, but that love would be sufficient for whatever came. I began sharing my story slowly, carefully. First with close friends, then with my students, finally with anyone who seemed ready to hear it. I wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. I was simply offering what had been given to me. The response was overwhelming. People hungry for hope, for meaning, for some assurance that love is stronger than death. Some were skeptical, and that was okay. I understood their doubt. If someone had told me this story before my accident, I might have been skeptical too. But I also saw how the telling itself planted seeds. Even in the doubters, something stirred when they heard about that perfect love, that absolute acceptance. Maybe they didn't believe in my experience, but they wanted to believe in that kind of love. And wanting to believe is often the first step toward finding it. Now, 3 years later, I live differently. Not perfectly, but differently. I still get frustrated, still worry about my family, still struggle with the normal challenges of human existence. But underneath it all flows a river of peace that I can tap into whenever I remember. I know where I came from before birth, and I know where I'm going after death. I know that love is the only thing that matters, and that every day is another chance to practice it. If you're hearing this story tonight, maybe it's not an accident. Maybe you need to know what I know, that you are loved beyond measure, that your life has meaning and purpose, that the struggles you're facing right now are not evidence that you're forgotten or alone, but opportunities to discover just how strong and beautiful your soul really is. You don't have to wait for a near-death experience to start living with this awareness. You can begin right now, in this moment, by choosing to see with eyes of love.